wowe wari ingeri y'abeza, abana bawe baseka bose, n'aya mateka y'indongozi, uraho Nyanza ya Butaruraho. Abana bawe na za nshuti zawe tuje gusangira, kwibuka amage, kwibuka abacu bazize kuba abantu, bambe bazize iki, kuba umuntu utazirwa.
When I was looking at what my friend Kizito put on, he said I was going to speak about genocide ideology. The genocide ideology in Rwanda, you have to go back through the history to really understand what happened. The seeds of the genocide were planted 1894. It took 100 years to get us to a completion and the fruitful of what they implanted in 1894. I'm not going to go talk about it. It is something that it will be good if you can just go and read and find out what I mean. However, in a few words, when that seed came, it came with the division, destroying our culture by the Western people who came in wanting to implant their politics of division, and from there it went downhill. It took a lot, it took many years, but it succeeded in destroying us. A lot of people here, Tutsi who survived the war, it's because mostly of the Hutus who saved them, but also the irony is that those Hutus will go around and kill other people somewhere else. So let me give you some numbers. In Rwanda, starting April 7, for 100 days, 1,074,017 people that were killed by the genocide. 934 people, 218,000, were recognized because their names are known. The great majority of these victims were identified as Tutsis. 93.6% were Tutsis of the killed people. The other 8.85% resembled or looked like Tutsis. So I guess they just died because of the way they look. 0.37% died because they were friends with Tutsis. 0.32% died because they married Tutsis. 0.17%, those are the Hutus I'm talking about, died because they saved or they had hidden Tutsis. And 0.64% died because they were against, obviously, the genocide that killed Tutsis. We have to know the truth. So the denying of the genocide against the Tutsi is the most horrific things. And in fact, right now, in France also, I heard there is a law now that is going to, in general, to punish those who deny genocide. I hope it applies to the Tutsi as well, because France is known to cover most of the genocide perpetrators. So the genocide ideology, it's not only about dehumanization, it's not only about assaulting people or dividing people. The denying of it is also punishable by law in Rwanda. And we should do everything we can on our social media. Every time you read it, please pinpoint it to it and say that is not right. This is what happened. Every one of us here, I'm sure, is smart enough to Google and be able to read and be able to see what someone is trying to talk about. Once those people are making lies, pinpoint to it. Tell your friends. We are in big number enough to make impact on social media. And most of the time, those social media, that's where a lot of people get information from, unfortunately. But if that's where they get information from, then put those true information on those social media. And I appreciate you guys listening to us, and I appreciate especially the foreigners that are here. What I call the foreigners, I'm talking about the Americans who are not in Rwanda. Because we know that you guys are supporting us, and you can get our words out better than us to those who we can't reach. So the denying of genocide, that's the new battle we are fighting, and we hope that you guys help us to fight it.
Thank you. I wanted to thank you all for this opportunity. My name is Rima Shahid, and I'm the Executive Director of the Muslim Alliance of Indiana. The Muslim Alliance of Indiana is the policy and civic engagement arm of the Muslim community here in Indiana. We're a statewide organization. And when my friend Kizito reached out to me to talk today, I think what he would like for me to talk about is maybe the stigma of Muslims here in our nation and in our state, and maybe what we're facing right now. I don't think it's a mystery that we're very polarized right now here in the United States. I know I was born here in Indianapolis, and a lot of times people ask me where I'm from, and I tell them I'm from 96th Street, and they don't really believe me, but what can you do? You know, and the fact is, and I really appreciate the Psychology Club for talking about stigma, is that there is a great stigma around being Muslim. There's a great stigma around these words, Muslim, Islam, and somehow they've become synonymous with violence and terrorism. And it's pushing our community that's been here. The first Muslims that were documented here in Indiana were in 1920. The first mosque, as far back as 1920, the first mosque was built in 1924 here in Indiana, and subsequently we've grown. And so it really pains me as a native Hoosier that now when I tell people I'm Muslim, there's questions about where my alliances are. There's questions about what I believe, and do I have an ulterior motive here? And the fact is, I don't. And I think that when you talk about violence, when you talk about putting one group against another group, this is what's happening today in the United States, unfortunately. About a year and a half ago, we had a Brownsburg teenager that was arrested for having connection to ISIS. And I had the New York Times call me and say, "What are you doing about this?" I said, wait a minute. What is his school doing about this? He changed 7 schools in 6 years. To me, that's a red flag. What is our law enforcement doing about this when he's Google searching and trying to recruit people? What are all these different people doing about this? And statistically, what we know is when people belong to a certain mosque, statistically, they have a very lower chance of joining any kind of terrorist group. And so what are we all doing about this? The fact is, the only thing that's being done right now is telling people, pushing them on the brinks of society, and joining ISIS is no different than joining a gang. You have disenfranchised people, and while I'm not justifying this in any way, so I hope nobody's tweeting me on this one, you have disenfranchised people, and you have a call there that says, join us. We're going to give you a purpose in life. Your government hates you. Your people hate you. Your media hates you. They all hate you. Join us. And unfortunately, while I know that's not true, if I'm an 18-year-old in Brownsburg and I have students in my school calling me a terrorist, I may question things. And that's where we are today. And it really pains me, and I talk about this quite frequently, is I have a 9-year-old son. And I'm sorry if anybody has heard this story before, but my 9-year-old, his name is Musa. And for those of you who may know, Musa is Arabic for Moses. And Musa came to me one day when I was filling out his paperwork for soccer, and he said, Mom, please put Bill as my name, because my friend said that they can't be friends with a Muslim. We are genuinely separating people. We are teaching our children that there's differences between them, and we're spreading hate from such a young age. And like the Psychology Club talked about with stigma, we need to educate people on who their neighbors are. We need to educate people on what Muslims really look like and how they act. And we need to talk about this, because it's a very fast and dangerous and slippery slope that we're all down right now.
Thank you, Lena.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Olis, and I am not from 96th Street, but I'm from 86th Street. So,
Close.
and also I'm from Brownsburg, and raising my family in Brownsburg right now on the northwest side. In 1994, that would have been the end of my sophomore, beginning of my junior year of high school when this genocide was occurring. And I remember very little from that time in my own life. What was happening in Rwanda in 1994 barely made a blip in central Indiana. It was years later when I was in college when I first read a book called Genocide, A Problem from Hell, and by Samantha Power, and that book kind of led me to think more about foreign policy and what are people in the United States supposed to be doing about genocide or thinking about genocide. And a few years later, I had an opportunity to work for an organization called GlobalSolutions.org, which was really basically about creating a grassroots movement in places like Indiana and Tennessee to have really hard conversations about foreign policy and what does good foreign policy look like? What does it mean to have a country that really cares about genocide prevention and cares about nuclear weapons and cares about, building a global governance that protects everybody and prevents genocide and mass atrocity and so I was asked to started a genocide prevention summit. So 5 years ago this month, we hosted the first ever, and I think first only, Indiana Genocide Prevention Summit. And I was told that there's this big guy running around town named Z. And nobody knew how to get a hold of him, but they knew he was out there, and somehow through the internet and through wandering around Pike Township, I finally met Z, Kizito, and so Kizito became one of was basically our speaker for that Genocide Prevention Summit 5 years ago. And on the day, we talked about Rwanda. We also, this was at the very beginning of the Syrian civil war, or I would now consider it a genocide. And at that point, there was maybe 10,000 people who had died in Syria at that point. Now, 5.5, 6 years later, there is 300,000 people, 400,000 people have been killed, and 2 million people displaced. And so that's how I first met Kizito and first became part of this conversation about Rwanda and genocide prevention and the role of the United States. And that's where our friendship really took off. But there's also another conversation we had that night. We showed the film Kinyarwanda, and it was about how, as many of you know this story, that during the genocide of Rwanda, while churches were often making places of massacre, it was the Muslim community that opened their gates and doors and protected people during the genocide. And so 5 years ago during this conference, to me that was a very powerful story about interfaith work and people crossing boundaries and protecting each other. And it was a powerful story of what we can do in a time of great tragedy and need. So I'm so thankful for that event, and so thankful for my friendship with Kizito and that story and that movie and the conversation about, that took off from there. So the next year, I'm a United Methodist Church member, very active, and so we really tried to tell this story about Rwanda and tie it to what was going on in Syria. And so at the United Methodist State Conference the next year, we showed the movie, the Kinyarwanda movie, outdoors to a bunch of United Methodists, and Kizito showed up and spoke, and we had a woman named Nora Basha, who was a high school student at the time, or college student, to tell her story about what it meant to be from Syria. And so we had Syrian food, showed this movie about Kinyarwanda, and had Muslims and Christians talking to each other about genocide prevention and what we can do as people of faith on these issues. And now 5 or 6 years have passed, and we live in a world where genocide continues to happen, and where we also have great denial. And one of the very sad events about our Genocide Prevention Summit is that we actually got protested. We had people protest the Genocide Prevention Summit, and they were basically denying genocide that day. They were using faulty analysis and alternative facts, what they call them alternative facts that day, to talk about what was going on, what happened in Rwanda, what was happening in Syria. And these were people from the left, people from the politically left, people who are supposed to have been most conscious about human history and social justice. And they were protesting us that day because they had bought into genocide denial and had bought into an ideology instead of truth and what history and what the facts tell us. And so that was a very eye-opening event where people who should have known better were denying genocide and protesting an event where we were talking about what can we do to prevent genocide. Another event that I really had with Kizito that I really thought was a powerful event was a couple years ago on 9/11. We had a conversation with a church that I worked for, called the Union Chapel United Methodist Church at 86 and Keystone. And on 9/11, there's a lot of conversations and a lot of emotion, and so we wanted to, what does it mean to be a peacemaker in an age of terror? And on that day, Kizito told his story and the story of Rwanda and what it meant to be a peacemaker.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk about the role of Rwandans in the fight against the genocide against the Tutsi that happened in 1994. But before I can do that, I want to address 3 specific areas. 23 years down the road, what's important to us is that it's important to remember. Remembering is important because the genocide against the Tutsi that happened in Rwanda in 1994 was an orchestrated, well-prepared genocide. It wasn't anything by mistake or created by any other conflict, but this is something that had been prepared for so long. So it becomes extremely important for us to remember so that generations that come after us can have those vivid memories and understand that this should never happen again. Not only in Rwanda, but anywhere else around the world. The second part is in the sense of uniting. Why should we unite as a people? We unite because it's extremely important that at the time of research and academic ingenuity, we find a large group of people developing their own theories and myth in regard to the genocide against the Tutsi. So, which they're using a sense of ideology. And ideology is extremely dangerous because if created in a certain way, it can become contagious in a negative aspect. There are so many writers, and actually we have had them in this country and around the world that even up to today continue to deny the genocide against the Tutsi. It's extremely important as a people of Rwanda and humanity at large to stand tall and fight against this wrong ideology. I'm not necessarily saying that flexing muscles, but I'm appealing to Rwandans and friends of Rwanda to talk about the reality of the genocide against the Tutsi so that we can keep away the myth that's been created by these individuals that on a large scale include a lot of academicians that will expect to have the highest level of integrity, but they continue writing things in their own context and not in the Rwandan context. So my appeal to Rwandans, even if you cannot write a paragraph, even if you cannot write a page, even if you cannot write a book, it is your responsibility, no matter where you are on this globe, to continue telling the story as it is. And when people are unified as one, then I don't think that they can be defeated. The other point, which is the third point that I want to talk about, is the aspect of renewal. Absolutely, 23 years down the road, the country continues to grow. The country continues to progress economically, socially, and it's very vivid based on various reports that we see from the World Bank and even from those friends of Rwanda that visit the country. Sometimes they say it's a miracle, but I don't think it's a miracle. The socio-economic transformation of the country that has happened today is because Rwandans believe in their own dignity, Rwandans believe in their own journey, and they believe in shaping their own road, and nobody should shape their road. So on the aspect of renewal, my appeal and call to fellow Rwandans is that we should stay the course. We should not have fear. We should believe that the journey that we are setting forth for our own country will shape a great legacy for Rwanda to come, and even when we have left this planet. So that's the way I wanted to address it from those three themes that tie into Kwibuka 23, which is the remembrance of 23. But this should not stop here as we're in this building. This has to be our continuous responsibility moving forward to emphasize that talking about the true story of the genocide against the Tutsi that happened in 1994 is our day-to-day responsibility. And my humble appeal to the friends of Rwanda and even other people is to stand tall together with fellow Rwandans in fighting these wrong ideologies and genocide deniers. We have them across the globe. And truly speaking, if we're addressing people that are academicians, you expect them to be intellectually savvy and able to understand things in the right context. But unfortunately, we see that there's an interest behind it. And if we don't come together as a people, these individuals will continue to spread rumors and wrong myths. And literally who will suffer? It's the generation to come. So, in conclusion, upon leaving this building, I appeal to you, in whichever capacity you are in, please and please continue advocating on behalf of Rwanda in writing, in engaging people in various discussions, so that the genocide against the Tutsi that happened in 1994 does not happen again and anywhere in this world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hello. I think I'll put the mic down.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
And if you don't mind, if I can stand. I'm kinda
Absolutely,
tired.
yes.
All right. My name is Kwesi Brown. I'm originally from Ghana. I'm the program director for Immigrant Welcome Center. I am actually going to continue from here before I tell you what we do. You know, at times it's so annoying when you read things in books and other areas about your culture, which is far different from what you know. You know, being in academia at times, you have to create problem and then try to resolve it for people to see your existence, right? That's what happens. I'm a professor myself. And then you have other people calling themselves African specialists. The same department. If you are African specialist because you spend 8 months in some town in one country, not even all the country, you call yourself specialist, then who am I? You know, it's annoying the way it is, but you see, they have the pen, the books, they have their audience to write. They read more. Just like what he's saying, this shouldn't end here. You can tell your story. You know, we believe in Proverbs. My grandfather always says, the wood can remain in the river for 1,000 years, but that can never turn into a crocodile. It will still be a wood. I don't care where you come from, your educational level, the way you write, you can never turn into a Rwandan. They know their story. Write whatever you want. But it's you. You know, tell your story. In your own small way, somebody is going to hear it and pass it on. So when they pick the book and they hear from you, they can tell the difference. I'm telling you, no researcher from outside the culture understands whatever is beneath what is going on. They are going to read what is happening and try to find answers to it, right? You know what is going on, long time. We believe in facial expressions and we can sit down and communicate without saying anything. They wouldn't understand. Tell your own story. If you don't, somebody is going to tell it in their own way and mislead other people. It's annoying, but let's tackle this from our own professional way, peaceful way. You know, take your time to, in your churches, you know, places of worship, everywhere. Talk to people, educate them, so that they will understand. Okay, Let me go on now with whatever I'm here to do.
You have the floor. Go.
Yeah. So it's annoying at times, when people try to define you. You can't stand it, but let me go back to why I'm here. Okay. So the Immigrant Welcome Center, we've been here for 11 years. It was started by the former mayor, Bart Peterson, and then the wife. What we do, Immigrant Welcome Center, we welcome immigrants and refugees. What kind of things that we do? We try to support them. At times you meet your friends from the West, why don't you just learn the language? It will help you. Look, ask them to come to your country, and then you tell them, why don't you speak Kinyarwanda or something? And they'll see how difficult it is, especially when you are old. The kids, they are fine. I visit families, and then right now, they are like Americans, the way they speak. And then parents will be watching them like, As an immigrant or refugee, we come from background that, it's not that easy. Moving from your culture to this culture at times, They say, no, you have to be on time all the time. You need to be here by this. Look, we control time. Time doesn't control us, where we come from. But then at the same time, we should also try to learn how the system works here. We need to meet it half and half so that you can get the help that you need. I know that, we control the time. But here, there are a lot of people lined up that they've scheduled them to come. Let's say doctor's appointment. So 9 o'clock, your appointment is 9, and you are now waiting for the bus at 9 o'clock. Guess what? They're going to move on. Try and understand that. We should adjust our lives and then get the help that we need. Because we get complaints all the time. You get calls. I don't understand. I showed up, but they tell me, when was your appointment? 8? You showed up at 10. Oh. It's like that everywhere. Even our parties and stuff, 10 o'clock, they show up like 1. Because we have to take care of things. That's how we are. They tell you, why don't you learn the language? Why don't you do this? You need to open an account. Look, some of us are coming from places that we never thought of, even, we've not heard about bank account checking or savings before. So right away you tell me, you need to have an account. What are you talking about? I don't even know what it is. You see, they don't take time, they expect you to know. But we don't. We don't, and then we have case managers who, I don't know, they try to push people through the system so that they can get their grant and stuff like that. I get calls and then they don't know what to do, they have food stamps, even how to apply for, because they have all these papers that they are expected to read. How about those who don't read English? You expect them to apply for food stamps. Then we have to take people somewhere. They say bring proof of ID and stuff, and some Christmas card somebody sent someone. That was what was in this person's bag, and I said, oh man, I should have inquired this before walking all the way here. You see, we are going through so many things. Confusion everywhere. This is a place that, we came here to seek refuge, but if you're not careful, it will worsen your case. The stress here. I traveled outside my country. Before I heard that there's this sickness called stress. I didn't know that in Ghana, whether you have money or not, you laugh and people to talk to. But here, you can have money, everything, but nobody to talk to. It's something heavy on us. Now they say you have stress, I have to go and sit in front of somebody who is going to advise me to do things that I love. This is free in my country. But now, for him telling me that I have to pay for that, and at times you get up and say, my grandmother has been telling me this all the time. The culture is different. The culture is different. It looks like everything here is money, 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 money. They'll put your medication, money, 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 money. That we are used to, one time I'm fine and I have to stop. Okay, so all this confusion going on, what I want you to understand is there's a place that you can come for that help. This paper here, I'll put it at the back. We have it in French, English, Arabic. Now we are working on Kiswahili and Kinyarwanda. Okay, so that you see that we have if you need language help, legal help, housing, healthcare, employment or transportation. I'm not saying I will buy you a car. Okay, so transportation, all these services are for free. All these services are for free. Okay, when you call us, I work through my natural helpers. These natural helpers are from, right now I have them from 43 different countries. We speak over 88 languages. He is one of our natural helpers. He is one, you know. So if somebody call me right now, the person is from Rwanda. What language do you speak? I'll look through my natural helpers, connect you with him. Okay? Then he is going to find out the kind of help you need. He will communicate with me, and then we'll get you the help. So we have about 150 natural helpers now. And you have to be bilingual. So that when somebody calls, you talk to the person, find out what is going on, they communicate with me, and then, look, all these areas, whether you have healthcare or not, we will get you the help. You need legal services, we'll get you. So please, I will leave some of these at the back. Just get one. This is English though. I have here. Get one and then give us a call. Okay? Don't take the stress. It's too much. Let us carry some for you. All right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Saunders, and I come bearing gifts. No, not presents or gifts you find under your Christmas tree, but more so when your gifts within become more present. And you find yourself on the other side of learned lessons with your present gifts. You better put your heart into it, because it will be hardly fluid if it's barely stewarded. You got to create, and don't hesitate. Let I am live your life. Now let that resonate. Aim for stars, barred with our fate, with our gifts we take course. Now let the force regulate. I know my Father and wonder under the clean black nights, remembering the chords of the big homie Nate, because nobody does it better. They can come closer than close, but original they never will be. Ready? Take no prisoners is a position of where your focus needs to concentrate. And when your heart beats a little faster and everything before you calls you master, that's the place. Trust me. I'm not talking about a paid for piece of paper and no reverence to race, but when purpose meets you on the path and then begins to laugh and says keep up and walks forward with a steady pace. Tells you to keep up before we take strides. See, it won't take long before we make a world riddled and divide. Be surprised when they see just how eloquently the fire shines from your eyes. Watch how everyone will rise up in place. This is the place where we are remastered by the master of life, and not just life itself, but from whom life gets its help. Shares its kung fu of going forward. Transforms you into the mind of Morpheus, but this is no movie where we can just press fast forward. Life don't move a little faster. Just with more precision, the closer we listen to the discipline of wisdom, seeking to remold those chose to be nothing more than urbanized bastards. That's not a mess in front of you. That's purpose to the mess in front of you. With these present gifts, I must remind you of this. Just because you say you have faith does not mean you're walking towards where you were called, even if it's unseen. We kicking down many powerful doors, so kicks must be fast and quick like Street Fighter's Chun Li, because children are art and are smart and know the deal for real. How dare we tell the kids to live their dream when we've never lived our very own and never even attempted greater range? Sometimes life will stall you, but don't take that as you should never aim for greater things. And I know things happen and tragedy intertwines and vibrations and lines are beyond our control. So now it's just time to console all the handful of no's that was painfully imposed. Look around you and see we are still standing here in spite of all the trauma we've seen unfold. Muhammad Ali, rest in peace. But it seems folks still have not learned the sacrificing tactic of rope a dope. That folks will take you out and leave you broke when you stand up right for freedom's hope. This is not about the right to vote, but to see we are one with eternity. with ancient dragons seeking to find their fire in the breath of the oppressed, and we are face down, deep, drowning in water, dipped in and out, longer and faster by anything that is oppressive, declaring itself your master. And just when your head spins, throwing in the towel appears to be the only option. Your present gifts begin to take lift, and you remember just what you've been taught when walking along your path. And as you feel yourself drifting fast, you remember when purpose looked at you and laughed. Says, get by my side and never look back. No need to wallow and spread wrath when it gets bad. This is where we calculate our attacks and understand that this was the reason we needed to learn math. As we multiply our potential, then divide it by 360 dimensions, and then begin to listen within a suspension that only stars like the sun recognize. Don't look so surprised. If my body begins to rise up out of the water, free from a food master's hands, up against the eyes, looks you square into your eyes, who's the master? With teeth catching bullets and mighty hands catching fish, you tell them this, I am. But God and present gifts live in the love for yourself and begin to show. The radiance of your shine defies the eyes and begin to glow. And the universe welcomes you to the place you've been trying to find. But ironically, you already know it's your time to shine. And if you only do what you can do, you will never be more than what you are now. Thank you.
You really are a master. Thank you. Your energy is amazing. Okay, it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Henriette Ngenga is a survivor of the '94 genocide against the Tutsis. She's the author of Carrying Divine, My Rwanda Genocide Survivor Story. She was a young Tutsi mother struggling to survive during the genocide in Rwanda while pregnant with her 5th child. She endured the Rwandan genocide as a Tutsi woman and protected her family in the process. Witnessing her family's degradation and experiencing her own torture, she finds strength in God to continue fighting for her and her unborn daughter's lives. Carrying Divine. Henriette's story is powerful and educational in today's world, past the 23rd year anniversary of this tragic genocide against Tutsis. She's a committed speaker on the genocide and now lives in South Bend, Indiana.
Feel like to stand up here and talk after all that, what we've been through. It's very emotional. When it gets at this time, we feel like, what can we say? Where can we start? I wish I could say what I have to say in my language, Kinyarwanda, but I will try to put it in English. And I thank God that it helps me. I always wanted to tell the story, and I encourage my fellow Rwandese, as everybody has been saying, tell the story. We need to tell the story. This story had to be heard. That's our healing. I saw how they were talking about the trauma, and just looking back what we go through, our children, what they go through when they hear these things all the time. Nobody knows what they go through, because who can tell our pain? Who can tell our suffering? I just have a little things here that I'm going to tell you in excuse me for a second. It just touched my heart. There are tears that never cease to fall. That is the truth. Many of you can say here, never. There is a word they use, roast. Roast is very weak word for us. For how many people we lost, how our people has been killed. And emptiness, that is never replenished. Emptiness. I don't know who can explain our emptiness. I remember my lost one, anytime anybody call mom, dad, brothers, sisters, any word, any movement, it reminded me my loving family that I lost for no reason. It is an honor for me to be here, and I thank you, brother, to give us the opportunity to talk about this. That is our healing. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, to sit down and listen. We never know what can happen. I tell my neighbors that you never choose me to be your neighbors. But I am your neighbor, and you don't know. If I do go through the trauma that is many people go through, what can happen in our neighborhood? It will be a mess. That's why all of you, when you take this time and you come and listen to us, you will help us to spread the news so people can know no one will go through this again. Because many of the survivors, this is what we go through in every April month. I say in every April month because at least somebody care and say they will help us to remember. They would help us to bury our family member's dead body that was on the street. That they would help us to tell the people so they can know that we are human beings instead of being a cockroach, instead of being called a snake. Some of you may don't understand what I'm talking about. Many of you do know, because the Tutsi has been called so many names. We never grown up and pray with other kids having our proud, because we've always been told that we are not from there. We are from Ethiopia. We've never been in Ethiopia. We don't know what Ethiopia is. But we've been called so many kind of names that we are not human beings, we are cockroach, we are snake, all kind of names. But now we are so happy to see somebody come and say, you're a human being. We love you. We care about you. I love my friend who come from far away, somewhere, to come and support and hear my voice today. That's a love that we need to see. Thank you for being here. Memories that nothing erases, and people, we are never depressed. Smile return. We smile, but only to mask the pain. We do. Thank you. As you heard, my name is Henriette. Some of you knows me by Nyirarukundo, but once I get in America, I changed my name to Njenga because I have 8 children. My 8 children was going in 2 different schools. Any school I go to, they call me a different name because we have a different last name. They will call me Nyonsawa, Nyomugabo, Kaitesi. It gets to the point where people think that, who's this lady? They couldn't figure out who I am because I have so many names. So my children started requesting that I should change my name to the family name. So we changed to the Njenga. I just tell you that so some of you who knows me as the Nyirarukundo will not question why did I change. I did not change my culture because I love my culture. I wrote a book. When I want to write my book, one thing I want people to understand. I know we've heard many things about books, movies, and there are many things out there about Rwanda 1994 genocide. But I'm telling you, when I want to say that, I want people to know that before genocide, Rwanda was a wonderful country. After genocide, Rwanda is a wonderful country. It does not matter what is this propaganda are going around and saying. What I know, people will know the truth. And people will know the truth through you as a Rwandese. Because they're going to see you, they're going to see your kindness, your culture, your character, and then they will know that you've been raised with a wonderful country, which is our country, Rwanda. And I love one of the speech of our President Kagame. He said, Rwanda has been changed and changed forever. I love that. And I believe that no matter what propaganda is saying, I know Rwanda has been changed. One thing that Rwanda has been changed on is they take the tribal out of our identity. That was one of the things I talk more in this book, because when we were trying to survive, we didn't know how we can survive because the tribal was in our things. And as many of you know, even if they talk about Rwandese, we were one nation, one culture, one language. We look like. And I talk about how, before John said, how Rwanda was, where I am from is in Kibuye, in my, let me call it state, Kibuye, where I was born, and in my village, they were so loving village. Even if we go to school and we come back with stress of the name they're calling us, but in our neighborhood, I didn't know who was Hutu or Tutsi, and I didn't even know who I am, because the family, the village we were born, grown up, it was so wonderful. And I went to look for something to eat at the table where they were studying the avocado. So as soon as I walked in there, I saw the lady that I called mother, and she said she can never be my mother because I'm cockroach. And I found her there, and I say, oh my God, Mom, I call her Mom again. And she said, yes, my Dora. And I'm like, what is that? I'm now your Dora. She said, yes, I am older, I am able to be your mother. And I'm like, you see, the spirit changed just because of propaganda. The propaganda was gone. The killers were gone. And the spirit of the killing and it was not there. So people turned to be who they are. And she was able to accept to be my mother. And one thing, there was the undercover people there, and they come there like, what's going on? And I just send them away. I say, I just want to talk to this lady. So I take her on side. I asked her, do you remember me? She said, no. Why would you kill somebody you don't know? She said, I didn't kill you. I said, no, you didn't kill me because I'm talking to you here. But remember what you've been, let's not talk too hard about it, but I want to tell you that I forgive you. And I want you to go and ask God to forgive you. I don't know if she did. After a while, when I come back, she was not there. But what I know, I just felt in my heart that I am redeemed.
There's a reason why we survived. I always say that there are two survivors. There are some of us who were here in 1994 when this was happening. And as we called back home, we kept hearing the bad news about our families being killed. And actually the phones were working until probably April 25th. We could call people back home and ask them how they're doing. When the phone didn't ring, we knew that they had come, the militia had come and had killed them. But again, the second group of people are the ones like Henrietta, Kizito, who went through that, who went through the fire, but who survived. For this Kwibuka 23, after 23 years, it always brings painful memories to all of us. For our families, we have to remember them. We know we're going to see them. We have that promise from the Lord that we're going to see them. As a matter of fact, in Revelation 21:3, it says, 21:4, I'm sorry, He will wipe away, talking about God, Jesus, He will wipe away every tear from the eyes. Death will be no more. There will be no mourning, crying, or pain anymore. for the former things have passed away. So this is just a message of hope for all of us who survived. There was a reason. Number two, the reason we survived is the reason God had a plan for us. I always talk to many survivors. When I go to Rwanda, I always like to listen to those who survived. It is unbelievable how everybody who survived will tell you. The minute they were killing, I would say, those militia killing my brothers, my sisters, or everybody else, I prayed God to help me to survive, to spare me, so that I can serve Him. So always my question is, so since then you survived, did you serve the Lord? And most of them will be like, it's been so hard, life was hard, I really forgotten my promises to serve Him. But in that last minute, everybody will tell you, I prayed, all of us were praying, and also I have asked God that if He spares me, I'm going to serve Him.
The genocide memorials, to me, it's the way I remember my parents. And just take it to the next level. Because most of us, most survivors, we're not able to confront our past. We're not able to confront our fear at the same level. Some of us choose different ways. They choose drugs and alcohol, self-destruction behaviors. Others took another route. We confront, we write books, talking. I talk until I sleep, trust me. That's what I do. I tell my story to every school in Indianapolis. I tell my story to the whole world. I just came from Canada, but I almost got stuck in Canada. So, that's another story. But thank you. Thank you, because this gives me something to look forward to every year, every April, so I don't have to worry about being angry. So this man right here, come on, Mr. Bengana. This is the man who changed my life. If it wasn't for him, I'm telling you that. If it wasn't for him, I won't be here. I met him when I was crazy. I met him. I came here just a basketball player. I didn't know he was here. I went through a lot, but later on, I found out he was in America, and I reached out to him, and he didn't know me. He knew my family. My dad was his godfather, right? Yeah. So when I reached out to him, you guys know exactly how it is. Double driver license, he helped me to get a driver license. He helped me to get life. And I want to say thank you to you, sir. Thank you to all the craziness I put you through. Yeah, I was a bad kid. But he guided me, put me through school, college, and and I'm here. So I thank you for all you've done for me, for everybody, and you helping me has helped me to raise Josiane and Leanne. Thank you. So let's continue with my brother, Kimo. So Kimo was supposed to speak panel, but he has some direction challenge. We're African, we don't use the mouth first, we just go. There was no mango tree around here, so he got lost a little bit. So, but he has something to say. So we just give him like just 2-3 minutes so to list what he has to say. And yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Kimo Opio from southwestern Ethiopia, Gambela. And I'm also a survivor from the genocide which occurred in Gambela. When it came a day like this, it took all of us back to whatever happened in our life. And me, okay, go ahead. Before I talk, I want us to do one thing we normally do. There's nothing important like life. It's a precious and worthy thing that we will never put. I ask you a little bit to stand 1 minute and quiet. for the people, the sisters, the fathers, for the life we lost.
Thank you, you may be sitting, for respect and honor that we give to our brother and sister we lost. Thank you.
You may be sitting. As I told you, I can't talk about my voice. You know, I'm a survivor. And a survivor will never fear. Whomever still fear, there's nothing happened to his life. Survivor is a star. Survivor is a witness. Survivor is ambassador of peace. What happened to us is like what happened to Rwandese. Especially the genocide that occurred before is the one of Rwanda in 1994. Whereby all African leaders use it as a system. So being a minority in Africa is a victim. But being a majority in Africa is a victory, because they got the power. So what happened in Gambela is the same thing happened in Rwanda. That genocide is not the same as war. It's different. In genocide, you will never fight back. But in a war, it's facing one another, which make difference. But what I feel most and what I hate most in my life is genocide. We have by your daughter or your wife or your sister or your brother will be killed and you see it. And you hide yourself because of your life and you see it. It's really painful. Even if you try to come out to rescue, you still die. But when you hide, you will be a survivor like today. And whenever you talk about it, it will take you back to that emotion. Sorry, because a lot of people have talked before me. I'll prepare myself, because I got a lot of words in my mind and in my heart. It's not something that you can write on a paper, because you got them with you. It's life already. Whenever I go anywhere, there's no need for me to carry a note. What for? I'm not creating something that is not happening. I got it in my heart. So genocide, I hate it. With a war, which is open, the genocide, killing somebody, why is silent? There's nothing you can do it. I was told to say, we the one killing. I was supposed to say that we will not go back and kill, because we hide ourselves in a church. And the watchman of the church refused to open the door, because they say if you don't open the door, we're going to shoot you inside. Then they count 1, 2, 3. Again, they count it again. They get the gun ready. Then it comes to my mind, we and children. You know, the most victim in the war is women and children. Our way men say they are men enough and boys like they want to fight. But the victim are women and children, always. Then I said, please give me the key. Let me open the door. And instead, they shoot us all with women and children. When I opened the door, they line me as number 1. And all the other men, they're after me. Then they claim it again that we're the one killing people. Because whatever happened to Rwanda, it becomes systematic of killing in all Africa. So they did the same thing, that they only, okay, the one happened in Gambela, at least better. I say better than the one happened in Rwanda, because it's about 800,000 people. Then we line up, and he told me who is in the front. Because in Ethiopia there is 83 tribes. But the other tribes say, hey, since you start killing, because it's about 4 days now when they start, it's not enough. They disagree themselves. Then those guys said, okay, we will leave you doing this. We have gone. Then the leader, the commander, said, he asked me, will you go back and kill again? Even though I know we are not the one killing, they are the one killing us, I say no. And that became the way we all rescue, and the other also rescue. Then they went away. So I don't want to go long. I got a lot of things in my mind. Whenever I talk, it's like flowing. So I have to stop it. Okay. I want to talk about the healing. Healing is not easy. There is type of healing. It's not just a sickness. It's not just a disease that you can go to hospital and get a prescription. It's not. You don't get a medicine of healing at all. But prayer can help. Crying is a healing. You cry a lot, you cry every day, at least you relieve. But even though you take medicine all day, all night, it's not going to help you with whatever happened to us. We will never heal you. But I realize crying is healing. But forgiveness is a reconciliation. Thank you, man. So, in depressions, trauma, anxiety, disaster, worry, it's hard. To need an individual. Somebody will not tell you.
You know, the same way I suffer headache, the same way you suffer headache. So let's move forward, but let's try to forgive. Let's try to bring all of us together. I brought these young people here. There's a new generation. I wish and I pray to God every single day that they will never have to be orphan. It hurts. It hurts so much not to have a mom. It hurts so much to be this young. I was 14 years old. To be this young and wondering who's going to feed you. It hurts so much to be in the middle of nowhere and just going, and you know it's a one-way street. You can't come back. You miss exit, you kept going, you find an exit. That's the life of most of us. Most of us survivors. We went through a lot, but we are here to show you that everything is possible. Eve can make it, Kimo can make it, all of us. Our little issues every day, you miss a parking spot at your job, your school, and you lose it. Come on, man. It means, it means a lot for that day. But look at the long term, the consequences of it. And that's why we're here to preach, that we forgive our oppressor. We forgive those who harm us, but at the same time, we are here to preach and to help the new generation, this new generation, they live a peaceful life. If they fail, if something happened, I think we'll be failures. That's my personal opinion. If my little daughter Kezo was here, if she has to go to live through the genocide that I lived through, I think she should blame me.
bagakunda u Rwanda rwabo bagakunda amahoro cyane bose barashize